speaker is another fellow at the NLI. Noah Revoy is somebody that we know and love. Definitely one of our best and brightest, and I am honored to say I consider him a friend of mine. So, the author of Become Immune to Manipulation, as well as Reprogram Your Life, a relationship and business coach, and one of our thought leaders. So, everyone, Noah Revoy.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Hello, everyone. We've heard some very detailed explanations about the world, and we've had some really great motivational speeches as well. And mine's going to tilt more towards the motivation. And I'm going to have a lot of overlap with what Luke talked about. And it may appear in some cases like I'm slightly disagreeing with him. But Luke is saying we, in the sense of we of the West have not yet started to fight. We have not engaged in the war. And I'm going to be talking about we in this room, and maybe a few others who aren't here in the room, but who are engaged in the fight. And so that's why it might appear a little bit different. But in reality, we do agree on the things that Luke was presenting. And so I was going to mention something about myself. So I was, one of the interesting things, former minister here. And so I have a lot of speech training as a minister. And when you're talking about religion, you're not necessarily transmitting a lot of facts. You're attempting to influence methods of behavior. That's what you do when you give a pastoral speech. You want people to change how they behave. And you do that by changing what they think about and how they think. And also how they feel. And if you only get one of the two of those, you're not going to get the results that you want. And so I learned that, and I've been applying that in all of my work since. But I also learned a lot from working with engineers about how to structure what we do, because we can have a desire for a certain outcome, but if we cannot engineer the result that we want, our desires will constantly be thwarted. And so we have to combine what we think about, what we feel, and then the systems or methods. And that's what we've talked about in the last 2 days, is the systems and methods to get us what we want. And I'm going to be talking about what is the war against the West, and specifically what is the various generations of warfare. That's what I'm going to start with. And you're going to notice a pattern here. The first generation, technically the first generation is not this. First generation of organized warfare wouldn't be this. This is a generation of the hero's age. This is generation 0 of warfare. This is a few guys meet in the woods and beat each other's brains out with sticks. It's not particularly organized, except they knew when and where to meet. And it's not necessarily government sponsored. This is when we were in little tribes, and it was very often surprise, and it was also very often women and children were on the front lines, because it might happen right in front of your wife and kids. It's disorganized, and the individual prowess of the fighters is what determined the outcome of the battle. And then we got governments involved in warfare, and they systematized it. Because of course they did. It's a male thing, and we're going to systematize it because that's what we do. We're going to systematize it, and we're going to say, what was the problem with that previous generation? Why did we lose? Look at all that exposed skin. Look at the big gaps in the line. So what do you notice about these guys?
They're armored.
High degree of cooperation. They're working together. They have a system. And a group organized in this manner can defeat a group 10 times bigger that's disorganized. We're starting to add masculine systemization to disorganized masculine warfare. And these lines, these phalanxes, these different types of organization were useful for different types of warfare. And it really culminated in the warfare of the Romans. And we saw earlier, these are some Celts. And they were absolutely wiped out in every battle by the Romans, unless there was an extreme mismatch or very bad management on the part of the Romans. Then we get another generation of warfare. This time we industrialize masculine violence. So we industrialized warfare by creating the rifled musket, the machine gun, indirect fire. And this is a picture of the trenches of World War I. This is where we got the height of the second generation of warfare. And it was before we had the widespread and effective use of motorized vehicles. Yes, there was tanks during the First World War. They were not employed in the same way as what we'll see. This is including Napoleonic warfare because we're getting rifled musket. I just used the most recent and memorable picture from it, which would be the First World War, because that's closer to our time.
So when we had gunpowder, is that essentially?
Yes, so in the previous battle, these are almost all aristocracy fighting. And in this battle, you can take a regular guy and you can put him through a very short process, turn him into a soldier. You can put a rifle in his hand and say, point it in that direction. And you can make an effective army.
Bullets are equalizers.
Yes. So the technology of this type of warfare absolutely displaced this type of warfare. And again, a much smaller army with machine guns can defeat another army without it. We see this in the American West with the Native Americans could not stand against the weapons that the West had. Now we have another innovation, and the Germans really pioneered this during the Blitzkrieg. It's maneuver warfare. And so we took the technology and we put it up a level by making it move around. So now you had what had previously been gun emplacements just absolutely roll over the placed formations that the French had in the Martello line. So they just rolled over it or went around it. Very fast, lightning speed, stealth, and they got by the enemy's lines. What was it? We used another innovation to make previous form of warfare obsolete and roll over them. And it took a while for the Allies to figure out how to counter the Blitzkrieg warfare. And by the way, this third generation of warfare still goes on. I guess you could say what's happening in Russia and Ukraine, between Russia and Ukraine, is a very technologically advanced form of third generation warfare. Then you have fourth generation warfare. And, you know, we're starting to stretch a little bit now the idea of warfare because this is a postmodern return to decentralized warfare. So this is, in some ways, it is culturally and socially very much like that zero generation warfare that we had before. And now we have non-government actors fighting each other and fighting governments. So we have the Wagner Group here, that's Russia. Olive Group is the UK. Blackwater, which has a new name now, just nobody knows it. Everyone knows Blackwater though. That's the US, and at the end is ISIS. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a paramilitary group. It can be a terrorist group as well. And this form of warfare fairly consistently beat third generation warfare. And we see that in the Americans having to retreat from Afghanistan, even though they were facing a much inferior force who was using a more advanced form of warfare, or at least one that was more suited to their particular needs. And that's the case, is advanced means suited to your needs, not necessarily more complicated. Fifth generation warfare is a war of information and perception. You used to have to kill your enemy. Now you can convince your enemy to castrate himself and therefore kill his entire genetic line, and every son that he had in the future, you don't have to fight him. This is incredibly cheap compared to the previous warfare. And again, it's a new form of warfare, so your enemy does not have a chance to instantly respond. They're going to need to figure out they're even at war and how they're going to respond. So it's primarily through non-kinetic military action, but not only through non-kinetic. So there is still some violence involved. And we see this with the George Floyd riots. By the way, if you search for that, it never comes up as a riot. It comes up as a protest. So I think that's quite interesting. Depending on who does it, it gets defined differently. And that is part of the war. And who is it that gets to choose that? CNN and the other media organizations. That's okay, we'll talk about it privately. We'll tell each other the truth. Why are we going to do that? On social media. Nope, not allowed to do that. Social media is not working on your side. X, a little more free. Facebook, they banned me. Why? We talked about things that made them uncomfortable. And you're not allowed to make effeminate organizations uncomfortable because you're wrong if you do that. So they banned me. and many of my friends. And some of these organizations are not, there's a flag there, but there's no organization connected to that flag. There is, however, a generalized social movement. So some of the actors in this warfare are generalized social movements. And at the end, I have the Ministry of Education logo for the US. So the captured institutions, they're involved in this as well. And they're more like weapons than like a particular actor in the war. In one of the most famous quotes about war, General Patton said, "The objective of war is not to die for your country, but to get the other guy to die for his." And in the case of fifth generation warfare, the idea is not to die for your idea, but to get the other guy to die for his. Or to castrate himself if you can. So we talked about the forms of warfare, 1 to 5, and next we're going to talk about the current conflict in the West. You know, people often ask me when the next American Civil War will start, and I lean into them and I go, "It already started? You just didn't notice." You know, it is there. It started before you were born. It started before I think anyone in this room was born. It's violent, it's multipolar, and it's global. And it's not just an American Civil War, it's a war across the entire West. And it's already claimed the lives of millions, destroyed countless families, captured our most important institutions, and imported millions of hostile aliens into our midst. This is not just a war of ideas. It has real physical consequences and costs that we have to pay. But we've not recognized it as war in general in the West. Some people did. Joseph McCarthy recognized it as war. And what happened to him? He got demonized over it. He recognized the threat. He tried to get his fellow Americans to recognize the threat. Some even did. But the moment that he was taken out of office, that he was no longer a threat, even the people who he'd woken up fell back asleep again. They did that as a warning to anyone else who would stand up against them. So we talk about warfare in the Natural Law Institute in a much more broad way than we generally talk about it in public or how people think about it. We talk about it as warfare against all forms of assets and capital. Now conflict, that is, you and I have something that we don't completely agree on, but we need to for some reason. How we're going to allocate a resource, how we're going to solve a problem. We have a conflict. Most of the time we can resolve those win-win. So I have a conflict with my wife. She wants to eat Italian and I want to eat barbecue. And so we are going to have to come to an agreement about that. But it doesn't matter if I eat Italian or barbecue. It's a win for me. I'm still going to have something good to eat with someone that I love. So we can always create a win-win situation. What happens when you can't create a win-win situation anymore? Either because your enemy won't let you, or because your desires are so opposed to them that it's impossible to satisfy both of you. Well, then you enter into warfare, which is the destructive win-lose. Somebody has to lose. We're not the only ones that know this. Our enemy knows this too. If they can't create a productive win-win conflict with us because they just want to take, they want to parasitize, then they choose to go into warfare against us. So we can say that the next American Civil War has already started, and there are essentially two groups of combatants, and it's not really, it's a multipolar war, as I said, so it's not a clear lines of who's on what side. But you have the parasitic elites. These are the criminal families, you know, the kind that are receiving money from China to run the country. And we see that there's things happening in the news about them, and they can act with impunity because they're in that parasitic elite. They put themselves in that place. And because we don't do anything about it. There are criminal enterprises. So I mean by that gangs, drug cartels, the mafia, which doesn't exist and never did. And also the deep state. That's a player in this as well. And the deep state is not a single entity. It's a whole group of different entities that sometimes cooperate, sometimes don't. And of course, foreign powers. Foreign powers would love to leverage this entire system to weaken the United States so that they can do what they want without the interference of the universal global police. Now these groups individually know what they want, and they want power. What do they want power over? They want power over the productive elites on the other end there. Why? Why do they want power over the productive elites? Because that's worth having. There's something to extract there. Nobody wants power over people who have nothing. The fact that they want power over you is because you have something they want to extract from you. They also take deliberate actions to get what they want. Some people call those conspiracies, but they don't have to talk to each other for those deliberate actions to work in tandem or work in sync with each other, because they cooperate based on incentives. They share incentives. Here's a great example. Who's familiar with the GameStop situation that's going on right now? Oh, great, a lot of people. So I'm going to really simply explain it, because by the time the video comes out, hopefully it's well on its way to getting resolved. So there was a company called GameStop, and they had a relatively obsolete business model, but it had potential. And some big Wall Street raiders came along and said, hey, I bet you we could use this company to make a lot of money. What we're going to do is we're going to buy a few shares, get control of the board of directors, and then we're going to sell not just the shares we have, but we're going to sell a bunch of shares we don't have. What do they call it if I was to sell a television that I don't own? Is that legal? How come I can sell shares in a company that I don't own? It's a good question.
I won't name them on video.
Yeah, there was a time when we couldn't do that. It was explicitly made legal. So what they did is they would sell these shares in a company they don't own. And some people caught on to this, and they realized that the company could be saved, that it could be improved. So many shares were sold. We don't know exactly how many, but some people said it was 10 times more shares were sold in the company than actually exist. Now these corporate raiders hoped to collapse the company so that when it came time to actually hand the shares over, there was nothing to hand over. They go, oh, sorry, can't hand it over. The company doesn't exist anymore. They get to keep the money for the product they sold that didn't exist by burning the store down that supposedly had the product in it. And they call this business. No, this is warfare. This is how you destroy capital to profit off it. Well, some young guys recognized what was going on, and they bought up a lot of stocks, and now there's, instead of the stock collapsing, it's actually gone up. And so now they're getting, the time is coming due for them to deliver the shares that they never had in the first place, that they can't buy because no one's going to sell them. And so this is how some people are fighting back in this war. That's not a way I'd ever thought of fighting back against it. But they're trying to prevent some of, I would call these corporate raiders criminal enterprises. That's where I'd put them in that list. So sometimes these groups, they fight with each other as well. And we'll look at them and go, wow, maybe that's a good guy because he doesn't like some of the bad guys. And the enemy of my enemy is my friend. No, the enemy of your enemy is just mad with your other enemy for the moment, but they're both your enemies. They're not your friends. And unless you know they're your friends, they're not your friends. So who's on the other side of this? It's the productive elites. It's the top 9%, the upper middle class. Following the Pareto principle, these are the people that produce the most value in the world. The American upper class has the lowest birth rate of everyone in North America. They have something like, it's about 1 child per woman. The middle class has slightly higher birth rate, almost enough for replacement, but not quite. That's the secondary target, is the middle class. Why do we always talk about the middle class being targeted? So that we don't notice that it's actually targeting the upper 9%. And that's how you get dysgenia. You don't target the middle, you target the top. And the special targets in this are our children, our women, and our younger men. They target our children through ideologies which separate them from their heritage and their culture and their gender. They target women through things like feminism. And they target younger men by either reducing their opportunity or making them feel so helpless and bitter that they're unable to take advantage of the opportunities they do have. Unfortunately, the productive elite have very little awareness of the conflict we're in. They know they're uncomfortable. They know the system is broken. They don't know how. They don't know why. They don't know for how long. They don't know who did it. And they don't understand that it is a conflict. They think it's the natural decay of the system due to reasons that are unexplainable. They also don't know what they want. That's not actually true. They know what they want. They want to pretend there's nothing happening. But they don't know what they want out of conflict. It's impossible to create a win-win conflict if you don't know what you want. You default into either being taken advantage of or war. And since they don't know what they want out of this conflict, they have no way of creating a set of demands. And if they don't have a set of demands, they can have no path to victory. And what this creates is a lot of infighting with very little cooperation, even when our incentives are aligned. Now, we in this room, despite being some of the most disagreeable people I've ever met in my life, we cooperate. Why? Because we understand our incentives are aligned. And because we know exactly what we want. We want the truth. And that makes it easy for us to cooperate. And we need, and that's part of our job here, is to help educate the upper middle class and the middle class on exactly what it is that they want out of this, how they can set their demands, and have a path to victory. So what are the tools of this war? The first tool of this war is manipulation. I call manipulation social and emotional warfare. When manipulation, especially malicious manipulation, is conducted against someone, the desire is to destroy them socially and emotionally so that you can impose a cost upon them which they feel compelled to pay whether or not they actually owe it. What else do they use? They use useful idiots. And this is one of the things, actually I think it was Luke that originally said it, that the combatant is not necessarily the enemy. I think that's what he said. So the people that are in front of us that appear to be set against us are not necessarily the enemy. They're very often individuals who have been ideologically captured and being turned against us. But they're not the originators of the attack. So we have special interest groups. That can be the flag people that I mentioned earlier. That can be people who have legitimate interests and want the world to be a better place, but they're approaching it from a method that isn't going to get them what they want and in fact makes them vulnerable to being manipulated and taken over by the parasitic elites. We have nonprofits and NGOs to the point where in some countries they have banned the entire concept of nonprofits because they just get used to launder money and to subvert the nation. We have mass media, which we spoke about earlier, social media, lawfare. We see what's happening with Trump and Bannon right now. And what happened even with many of the J6ers, it was lawfare. It was not an application of the law that if you were 20 years ago, no one would imagine it would have been applied that way. So it was done because of their political opinions. Immigration. Since 1965, immigration has been used as a tool of warfare against America. And people think, well, it's to buy votes. Well, they forget that it actually has more to do with the second from the end there, criminal anarchy. Creating criminal anarchy justifies a larger police state. It justifies more radical measures. It justifies lawfare. Because you've now created a vulnerability that you can benefit off, that you can profit off. And fiscal policy. The fiscal policy of the United States is designed to allow special interests to capture the wealth of the productive class. It's not designed to protect their wealth.
Is your goal for us to get really depressed during this conversation?
Well, I want people to understand the war has already started and that our problem really is that we haven't fought back. It's a continuation of what Luke had. Here's one of the things that I think is very important. We need to see the people who, but for God's grace we could be, who are the captured POWs in this war, who've been brainwashed into thinking that they're our enemies. We have to look at them from a paternal aspect, as if we are their fathers and they're bratty children that are misbehaving. And we need to reestablish the incentives for them to behave properly, millions of people have been captured. If you've been following the child genital mutilation issues that have been going on and seen some of the pictures of these girls that have undergone various transition surgeries, if this happened 100 years ago, that alone would have brought men with guns into the street. We have to look at these people as needing to be rescued. And this needs to help motivate us. This is a total war. This is not the honorable warfare that we used to fight as Europeans. It's new and it's different for us, but it's not new and different for our enemies. Because in every other part of the world, this is how you fight. You kill your enemy's children, you rape their women, and you blow up their stuff, and then you torture them. That's how they win. And we come into this war and we say, well, there's rules and we have to treat each other well and we have to talk this out and we have to go through the democratic process. And I think we just have to vote and, we got to put the right guy in power and he's going to fix all of our problems. Because we're civilized and we're fighting savages. And it's become pathological. At least from our perspective. From their perspective, it's just another day. It became pathological when we allowed women and children to be on the front lines because we didn't perceive it as war and we didn't stop it 2 or 3 or 4 generations ago when we could have done it much more easily. Curt mentioned that there was direct, violent threats against people in the universities teaching historical truth. At that point, if we nipped it in the bud, we wouldn't have to have this conversation today. And if we did, we might be having it on Mars. When we allowed women to vote, we put them on the front lines of this war and made them targets. And when you put women on the front lines of a war, you put children on the front lines. Wherever the women go, the children go too. Or they don't go if they don't get born in the first place. The breakup of the family corporation made the state more powerful. We allowed that to happen. We didn't have to choose nuclear family over extended family. We weren't forced to do that. We chose it. When we allowed public school to replace home and private education, we created an easily capturable system of indoctrination. When I was a kid, every new school year, my dad would go to the school and we'd work out, he was quite a large man, and he'd get a real good pump and he'd go to the school and he'd take the teacher aside and he'd say to the teacher, if you have any problems with my son, here's my phone number. Give him a card with his phone number. He says, if you have any problems at the school here, let me know. If you need volunteers, I'll be here. If you want someone to go on a school trip, I'll help out. If the school needs anything, tell me, I'll get it. And if you mess with my kid, I'll kill you. Never had any problems. And when I had problems, it was because I ended up in the later grades when I had like 10 teachers and my dad said, I didn't have time to threaten everybody today. I figure I threatened the main one and then he'd tell the others, but it didn't always work. But it worked very well when I was a kid. It actually saved me from being targeted by predators. I remember one of these people said, what's your name? And I said who I was, like, oh, I know who your dad is, never mind, I'll leave you alone. And he walked away. And that was someone that other kids warned me about. They said, that guy's a predator, stay away from him. One of the teachers in the school. But we allowed it to happen. Why? Because we weren't willing to take the necessary measures to make sure it didn't happen. Let's talk a little bit about manipulation. I happen to know a lot about manipulation because I used to be a minister. I also wrote a book on it.
Did you read a book on this?
Yeah, I wrote a book on it. It was absolutely, when I started hearing the GSRM stuff and Curt explaining this, I said, that's exactly what it is. I'd studied pretty extensively how cults indoctrinate people in order to help people get unindoctrinated. And it's through manipulation that you indoctrinate people. It's also through manipulation that you interrogate people. Modern interrogation isn't particularly torturous. It's more about manipulating their mind and getting them to want to tell you the secrets they're not supposed to tell you. Manipulation is incredibly powerful. And what we're dealing with is psychological terrorists. These are experts at hijacking the human brain. They combine the masculine systematizing with feminine warfare, which is manipulation. to create industrial scale social and emotional warfare. Do you remember before when I said the various generations of warfare were all about innovation, systemization, and industrialization in order to create asymmetrical power so that individual soldiers were far more lethal than they were before. This is the continuation of that process. Why do they do that? It's a lot cheaper, it's a lot safer, it's a lot easier to mentally capture, enslave, castrate, and extract wealth from a mind-controlled NPC than it is to physically conquer them. If our enemies try to do physically what they have been very successful at doing psychologically to us, we would have fought them.
Yes, sir.
If armed men show, people think that, they think Red Dawn when they think of the US being taken over. Why would that never work? Because no country would be stupid enough to make an armed invasion of the United States of America. So what are they going to do? They're going to innovate. And this is their innovation. Yeah, I have a GSRM bingo card. This is the tactics used under the strategy of manipulation. And you can watch the news. You print this out, you watch the news, and every time you see a manipulation tactic, you stamp one of the bingo cards there, and you try to get bingo by the end of the night. Yeah. I had it originally as a drinking game, but nobody would have lived through it.
How did you win that game? How do you win? Truth.
Yeah, you win complete and total disrespect for the entire journalistic enterprise.
How long? I mean, this is a problem. I mean, it's like which channel do you watch? You put on like NBC Morning News. I mean, I can't punch them fast enough.
And believe it or not, I think the best is to watch the one you respect the most. Yeah, watch the one you respect the most.
Al Jazeera.
Yeah. Well, and you'll notice that they attempt different systems of manipulation depending on the main US channels are all kind of in sync because they take their orders from the same place. But if you watch the various international channels, you can kind of calculate what the truth is, because if they all lie in different ways, you can find that one thread in there that's connected that's true, where they didn't lie, and you kind of piece it together. It's the same way that they fix ancient translations of books where there's been mistakes. They get enough of the books together that they can see there where majority of them would agree and therefore fix the mistake. Kind of do that with the news too, piece it together. You also know that generally manipulation is getting you to look in the opposite direction of the problem. So once you understand what they're doing, you can figure it out. And it works so well that my 10-year-old son, when he comes home from school, he'll say, "Dad, at school they told us this thing that that they believe," and he says, "I don't know what the truth is, but I know it's not that." He knows it's not what he was told, and that's the first step. The first step isn't trying to figure out what is true, it's trying to eliminate all the lies you've been told. Yeah. Once you can do that, as Sherlock Holmes says, whatever's left is probably the truth. We have to recognize that we have enemies that hate us. So I said earlier they're looking for power, but some people just want to see the world burn. They don't care about power. They just want to hurt people. And a lot of the elites, the parasitic elites, are generations in those groups. And they have, if they're that kind of evil people, they're not going to treat their kids very well either. So you got a lot of messed up people in that group, and they just want to see things burn. They want to see us diseased, dead, conquered, or enslaved. A few comedians have good bits about this. We make the mistake with some hubris, and I say this is our mistake. Some hubris of imagining that others are more like us than they really are. We imagine that they are high trust, that we have this Christian patience and this European ability, that they have this European ability to pay the high cost of whiteness, which is the slur way of saying just the maximization of responsibility that's part of our culture. But this denies our differences and our uniqueness. It also denies their own strategy. It's a little rude to assume that we can bring them to our country and when they touch our magic dirt, they're going to become just like us. Or somehow we're going to be able to say, you're all of a sudden, you're going to behave the way that we've been accustomed to behave over 5,000 years of intense evolutionary pressure through the law. Well, we're going to fix you in the first few months you're here. That's why I say it's hubris. Most cultures are engaged in constant warfare of all against all by the lowest cost means possible. And here's the problem. By the lowest cost means possible, which means they'll find out whatever dirty trick works, and they'll use it over and over and over again. Why do we believe these things? This isn't even anybody's fault for teaching us this. We self-manipulated into this, and this opened the door to all the other manipulations that we have suffered. Last time we had a Women and Children on the Frontline war in America was during the American Indian Wars. I want you to take a look at the date there. People don't realize that the US was still engaged in warfare against the Apaches up until 1924. Can you imagine that? And in Mexico, in 2017, they were still seeing potential Apache rebel forces in Mexico. So these kind of irregular wars, where women and children are on the front line, where it becomes a you must cooperate with your local neighbors, where the federal government, the state government can't help you, and half the time their policies are making it worse for you. And the moment you're about to actually win, they come along and make an agreement with your enemies to protect them. These kind of things have happened before. And I highly suggest picking up some books about what happened during these eras. You're going to learn a lot about them. It's been recommended by a lot of the people that I follow that are talking about the current zeitgeist and social breakdown. You're going to have to cooperate with your neighbors, whether you like them or not.
Yeah.
And that means maybe you're going to have to persuade them to like you, or at least to dislike your enemy more than they dislike you. So in summary, we are at war. Well, most of us aren't. Those in this room are. You wouldn't be here if you didn't believe we were at war. This is the only difference I have with Luke. I think we were taught the we part was, he meant all the collective we of the West, and I just meant us because I know we already recognize it. But it's a different kind of warfare than we're adapted to, and it's going to feel dirty because it is a dirty war. You know, we're going to have to, in order to win this war, we're going to have to do some dirty things too. We're not going to be able to fight clean. We're not going to be able to fight like gentlemen versus gentlemen, because we're not fighting gentlemen, we're fighting savages. And we're going to have to fight like savages. That was a key component to the U.S. Beating the Native Americans in the Apache Wars, was recognizing they had to adopt their successful tactics and reuse them. We also have to realize this is an all against all war, and we got a lot of soft targets running around out there. I see young men as soft targets. It sounds kind of insulting. Well, it's something that Curt has reminded me of, is just because we can rebuild from disaster doesn't mean the vast majority of people can. And this is a problem that we'll see in our group, because we're, you know, our average IQ here is probably 2 or 3 standard deviations above the average IQ of the population. And we look at problems and we're like, well, obviously it's that. Well, this is easy to fix. Yes, it is for us, but not for the vast majority of people. The vast majority of people can't handle a single setback at the moment. Most Americans are massively in debt. Nobody has any savings. They can't afford to lose their job. They can't afford to do anything. And they need to help. They need help to get on a war footing where they can do that. The attack is against our culture, our institutions, our society, our property, our genetics, and our health. And manipulation, which is social and emotional warfare, is a main weapon of this war, and therefore it behooves us to inoculate ourselves against it. I wanted to put it like it was a vaccine at first. Unfortunately, it coincided with COVID. So I thought that was kind of a contradictory message. But once you understand what they're doing to you, and I found this at even ordinary, regular people, even children, when they read this book, and they understand what's being done to them, it loses its power. Manipulation is word magic. Word magic doesn't work if you know what's behind the magician. It's kind of like looking at tricks when it's been explained to you. It's no longer any fun. So let's take the fun out of it for our enemies. Now here's the thing, we can fight back and we will win if we do so, and there are legal means available to fight back right now. I'm not going to get into them yet because this is going to be talked about later. We don't need to wait for anything. So we don't need to wait for permission to fight back. We don't need to wait for the law to change. We don't need to wait for somebody to get elected to save us. We don't need to wait for our wife's permission. We can go do it right now. We don't need to wait for anything. We can start right now. And that's the attitude I want you to have right now. What can I do right now? What can I do next? Thank you very much. And I will continue this later. You can get my book at the back of the room. I'll even sign it for you. Any questions?
I noticed that you pointed that we're in a social emotional form of warfare. So in that our new education style is social emotional learning, you would say that that's direct warfare on our children?
Yes, that particular program is designed to make your children more vulnerable to manipulation. You know, if you went back to the 1920s and they said that someone's coming to your school to read pornography to your children, you would have said, oh, when? And you would have shown up with your friends and you would have never made it to the school. And whoever approved it wouldn't have made it back home.
And if a judge disagreed with those actions?
No, you would have got feted by the local community.
Yeah.
You would have got a little parade. Now, I'm not saying to handle it in that exact way. But now we try to ignore the problem in general, and that's not working either. So we need to find the legal methods to deal with this. And you know, I have been, since I've had children, in positions where we've been in government institutions that have brought in what were clearly pedophiles, and myself and other fathers told them to leave or there would be trouble. They back down. They'll go look for somewhere where it's easier to operate. It works.
That, you know, in some room around here somewhere, I was holding a public event for conservatives to show up, and we had some left-wing activists show up. They're actually timid. So I said, well, you can, you know, you're welcome to be here, because or whatever. But if you try to play, kind of go through your leftist skins, we're going to physically throw you out or worse. Yeah. And so you just get around them and confront them, because that's what they do. You have to flip it around and say, bait them into hazard by the same means. If they'll respond with aggression, you can take care of them. Anyway, I just want to say this is a great presentation.
Thank you. There is a large contingent on the left that they're the children that were mentioned earlier by Haythrun that need fathering, and part of fathering is setting boundaries and rules and then enforcing those even when it's uncomfortable for the child, and they want that. It's not just that they're timid, they want someone to say, no, that's not okay. That's too far. Back off. They need it for their own health.
Noah, I would like to offer a reframing. Generations of warfare. I look at it as domains. Domain 1 is the self, the war by skill. Domain 2, war by organization, me and my friends. Domain 3, industry involved, outproduce for me and my friends. 4, war by speed, incorporating all the prior domains. We're just discovering new domains. That was creating the optimal OODA loop for one set of thinkers.
What does systematizing mean?
Generation 4, make more OODA loops to overwhelm one OODA loop. Generation 5 is just bringing war to women.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was really good. Write that down in the text.
Well, I hear all the time people say, oh, go ahead.
I am not complete. What you're seeing is the expansion and mastery of domain and warfare through the ages by scale, maneuver, skill, cooperation, all those things. What we're seeing now in social media and the conflict in fifth domain is trench warfare in all the domains that we know how to fight. It's about making it more and more and more expensive for our enemies to maneuver and attack us. Because right now, it's not just easy, it's profitable. because we perfected single OODA loop warfare that allowed us to select, control, and prevent as much damage as possible to women and children and the institutions that are expensive to rebuild. And that is the avenue they use to attack us, is expanding warfare to the domain in which we are uncomfortable to participate.
Absolutely. There are groups which will strap their children, they'll put their children right in harm's way of the conflict, and even their women. They will put weapons in schools. They will have their women teach their children to be suicide bombers, this kind of stuff, because if they're fighting an opponent that thinks like a Westerner, we're going to hesitate. Now, our enemy isn't going to hesitate to go after our families and our children. They're not going to hesitate at all because they know that works. In fact, that's where they prefer to attack.
Because they know it's demoralizing us.
Yeah.
I just want to comment on a trend that I've been hearing from you and just about recapturing some of not enemy combatants, or not our enemies, but the enemy combatants. One thing I've learned about the left, because I was in the riots, I've been to a lot of left-wing events, and they have a higher care instinct, a much higher care instinct. It's just that they're disordered and it's been turned. And I would agree that providing them structure, a masculine frame, that if we can do that in a way where they would understand that that is our form of care given back to them, they would come around and give us a lot of that social glue that typically right-wing groups are missing, and that's why we fall apart.
I have a friend, and when he was in university, he met a significantly overweight, blue-haired feminist who hated men. And she was absolutely miserable, but she was trying to get his attention because he was a tall, masculine man. And he looks at her and he says, "You know why you're so miserable? You're fat, you have blue hair, you hate men, and you got a nose ring." He said, "Fix it, and you'll be more happy." So she showed him by losing weight, getting normal colored hair, taking the ring out, stopping to hate men, and then they got married and they have 2 kids now. And yeah, you know who that is. Wanda knows who it is. A few of you might know.
That's actually true.
It's an absolutely true story. Yeah, Wanda knows who it is.
So somebody, I don't want to hear the name, but
No.
people in here know who that is.
Yeah.
We know who that is. You can't
Yes.
recap.
But he didn't say it to insult her. He didn't say it because he hated her. He legitimately felt a paternalistic pity for the situation she was in and offered her the advice that no one else in her life cared enough about to offer. See, the left has high care, but because they're not truthful, much of that care becomes pathological. We also must care for people, but we must do it with truth in a paternalistic in a paternal manner so that we can help people. I never have women, including horrible, shrill feminists, treat me badly in real life. They always treat me well because I approach them with love and care and consideration, and I diffuse their hatred because they don't hate me. Why would anyone hate me? I'm great. They hate the fact that they didn't have a father.
Okay, so something that I observed being a woman coming from a fatherless home is that men, you can tell me if this is true, but I believe it is, that of course men seek to gain sexual access to all available fertile women who are not members of their own family, correct? Okay. I know exceptions, but when you see an opportunity in the form of a woman who's out there, you're assessing risk to acquire sexual access to that woman. Is that correct? Okay. So, fatherless girls are particularly vulnerable because men see that they're not protected. They have no man there who's looking out for their interests. And in addition to that, that girl has not been influenced by a father to even know how to protect her own interests or what her value is. That's what I was talking about earlier. These girls suffer horribly because they do not know how to participate in the marketplace to get what they need, All they're trying to do is get their needs met, and they keep falling into these situations where they get preyed upon by opportunistic men who see them as women who are capable of negotiating in exchanges with them instead of vulnerable little girls who were not fathered and have no protection. This has to stop. We need to start recognizing that these are not mature fathered women who are capable of negotiating those contracts with men, but rather girls who need to be fathered by men like Noah and other, yes.
And it's a lot easier to father them when they are children.
Sorry, it's a little personal for me.
So when we're dealing with them as adults, we have to, of course, be careful. You know, if you're a man dealing with a vulnerable woman, a lot of them conflate love with sexuality, and so if you demonstrate, and English is not very good at describing love, we have one word for it. Greek has, I think, 7 different words for love, and the one that you would demonstrate to these women is what's called agape love. This is the principled love of you are another human being in need of my people, and I want to help you even though I don't particularly know you. If you know them, it'll be philia, and there's other ones for that. And so it has to be kept on that plane. And when my friend gave advice to his colleague at school, he gave it from that frame. And if we could speak with plain love and care, whether we're speaking on social media or whether we're speaking to these people in person, that is much more powerful than taunting them like we're also a bunch of teenagers.
It just makes it worse because they're just looking for.
We do not need to antagonize the crazies. We need to heal them.
Just to further Heathren's point too, I study media a lot, and what I notice is that Fox News, the Daily Wire, and a lot of other so-called conservative media outlets, whenever there's a real when there's real demonstrated behavior of a vector of attack on Western civilization, you'll notice that that's when they put out all of the criticism of like trans and all the feminists, not to educate them, not coming from paternalistic care, but coming from this standpoint of we're going to rationally debate, and not even debate, just bicker with them and call it a media segment. And that's always done, I notice, whenever actual attacks on the structure of the West that are of a more prosaic, a more legalistic nature are being made, that's when Conservative Incorporated just goes, let's put on culture war stuff. Let's put on more culture war stuff to get us arguing with the wrong people. So that's what I want to further that point. We have to look at these people as unfathered and underfathered victims. They are generational victims of a warfare. They would have had 5 kids or 3 kids, or they would have had an accessory role to so many different families. And instead, we're being told by fake I don't know what to call it, fake leaders of fake conservatism incorporated to attack these people. They're the useful idiots. They are idiots, it's true, and they're useful for our enemies. We have to make them useful for us. So I just wanted to further that.
Absolutely. And those mass media organizations do not exist to advance our interests because you think about it, everyone else is conquered and they're allowed to still advance our interests? No. They're there to ensure that any mature men on our side are unable to create an empathetic connection with those on the left who are not completely gone and bring them, perhaps not all the way over to us. There may not be constitutionally inclined towards it, but to take them out of the enemy role and into a neutral role where they're not particularly against us. They're there to make sure that we all hate each other. There's some on the left for that, there's some on the right for that. And it's our job as the only adults left. We are the only adults left. And we need to act like it. And this is why we have decorum rules for the Natural Law Institute. We have to act like adults. We have to act like we care and like we love things, and that's why we're doing them, and it's not out of hate. Why is it that the left says everything the right does is out of hate? It's partly projection. And it's partly because all the so-called right-wing news media inflames that idea within them. They know exactly the words to say to push their buttons. I have a cousin, and she's very much like me, except the feminine reverse. So her intuition is the reverse of my intuition, and so her solutions are all the opposite of my solutions. So of course she's on the left and I'm on the right, and she's not a bad person. She's just following her intuitions, But her perception of people who agree with us is that we do it from hate, until it can be explained to her that no, we're proceeding actually out of a deep sense of love and commitment to our fellow human beings and to the people of our own communities that we want to help, who have been captured by poisonous ideas.
Yes. So there's something else to kind of add to all that is like there are these false perception narratives that are going around, particularly in the dating market, is something I have picked up on. So like the red pill community comes off like they're truth seekers, and they talk about how women are promiscuous and everything like this, and they have these podcasts and everything. And one thing that I noticed in one particular podcast is there's always the same 15 women that they just cycle through.
By the way, all those women have OnlyFans accounts, or they are literal whores.
Yes. Yeah, they try to paint this picture that is the norm, that is the standard, and that's not true at all. Like a lot of men and women, there's a lot of normal men and women out there, and we're just kind of scattered. We're spread thin, and we're just kind of in hiding because we don't know where to gather. We don't know how to meet people in real life, and then all we get is this perception that when we view the internet, it's nothing more than degenerate filth. And so it scares people.
If Sparta could have convinced the Persians to stop having children, they would have never been invaded by Persia. You can't invade with 1 million men if you didn't have 1 million mothers producing them. The current, this is why I said young men are one of the major targets of this. Young men today are incredibly lonely, and they have very little experience with women. And if you can convince them by filming the worst 0.5% of women that all women are like that, they'll give up and do other things. Because contrary to popular belief, men are much more able to be independent and on our own than women are. We can enjoy our hobby, we can go hunting and fishing, and we can lose ourselves in video games in our imagination. It's very interesting to be in our minds. Whereas women, they need men so that they don't go even more crazy than they are without men. And so we provide that stabilization to them, and so they need us. And they keep women fragile by separating them from men so that they don't get the support that they need. They don't get that emotional regulation that being in the presence of masculine men provides them. And then they keep the young men lonely and busy wasting their time by making it seem that women are all horrible and crazy. Even though I may have contributed that by mentioning they were crazy, but it only appears crazy to us. It's completely rational when you're in the mind of a woman. Yeah. Well, and you'll see sometimes they'll ask a woman, do you want to be in the woods with a bear or a man?
Oh, gosh.
Well, how much do you think a man should earn before you date him? And what'll happen, you'll see this first woman will say, $80,000 a year, that's enough for a family. And so she's seriously answering the question. The next one goes, well, I'm not going to just repeat what she said. I'm going to go crazy. 200,000. Next one will go 4 million. Do you think that they're just joking? They're trolling the guy who's asking the questions. But they'll put that up as if the women really think that, and men who have no experience with women will believe it. And again, this is more manipulation. Unfortunately, this also comes from people who think they're on our side. But the useful idiots aren't all on the left. We got plenty of useful idiots on the right too.
Yes.
And a lot of useless idiots as well. Any other comments? Questions?
Yeah, I was just going to ask, typically when you're, and this is for the coaches, I guess, when you're in a position where you're able to speak to a woman who's like the one you described, like the 800-pound blue-haired feminist, if they're going to listen to you, like typically you're in a leadership perspective relative to who they are. How do you engage in that like form of mentorship with them without them like finding you sexually attractive or feeling sexually rejected by you when you inevitably don't want something with them, and then that causing them to start the GSSRM cycle and whatnot?
I don't think you can do that. You're just too sexy. I'd stick to mentoring men. Leave all the women for me.
Okay, I'll pass them on.
Leave all the women for me. I've had this problem quite a few times, and what you do is you treat them like a father, and it's the least sexy thing you can possibly do. And if they do start to like you, you remind them that you are there as in a father role capacity. And again, you treat them like a kid, like a daughter.
And who taught me this? Was it you? I said, well, I've had lots of friendships with women, and I love them because I'm basically autistic and I'm an autistic incompetent, so I want that insight. But you said, well, but all those relationships you're in are like a parental or a mentoring role. And I'm like, God, that's brilliant. And of course, I don't understand. I thought it was, whoever said that, was it you or him or something? Yeah, it was you. It was brilliant.
That's also why the violation of the mentor role is so damaging and devastating, and why we really need strong barriers against those lines being breached.
Yeah, it used to be your minister, your pastor, your priest, whatever, could provide this to a young man or a young woman, and it wouldn't have been questioned. There wouldn't have been any, we don't have the problems then that we have now. I mean, men really have to be careful when they're stepping into that role. Make sure that they're taking precautions.
I have found the key to it is to be so sufficiently sexually satisfied with your wife that you don't seek anything elsewhere, and that you can be very blunt and it's like, no, I'm not interested. I got everything I need at home. I'm not here to help you in that way.
I just wanted to add on the conservative or supposedly conservative whorecasting podcasts. They're also propagandizing our women, saying that that's okay, even though they're trashing on these OnlyFans women. They're giving them attention, a platform, and they're giving them things that show that they're still socially acceptable.
Well, there's been a number of the interviewers have been exposed as currently working for U.S. intelligence agencies. And there is a way that you ruin a legitimate movement, is you infiltrate it with a bunch of people that just nod their head and pretend to go along with everything, and then a few of them get popular, and then they say the heterodox line, they say exactly what the rest of the movement says, until they gain enough attention, either because they're really smart or they have nice tits, and when they're at that point, then all of a sudden they go off the rails and they go real crazy, and they'll say something completely against what the movement's original idea was, but now you have a whole bunch of them doing this at the same time. And the red pill started out as morally, not a moral judgment. It was men are this way, women are that way. It's exactly what we talk about. Yeah. And it was not even judging women for being that way. It was just like, well, they're that way and you should probably do this and this so that you don't get hurt expecting women to act like men. And that got infiltrated by a bunch of people that said, women do that and we hate them for it because they're not men. And what is a man who hates women for being women?
Gay.
Yes, exactly. He's gay. Okay, that's okay. You want to do that. But then don't claim to give men advice about women when you hate women. Anybody else? Excellent. Thank you very much.